The exact biological mechanism that separates elite human cognitive dominance from average, exhausted performance is actively suppressed by the modern productivity industry. Millions of highly ambitious individuals are voluntarily destroying their central nervous systems every single day by falsely equating brute force physical and mental labor with superior biological adaptation. The mainstream narrative glorifies the aesthetic of pure exertion, rewarding the individual who sweats the most, works the longest hours, and applies the highest amount of physical friction to their daily routine. This is a mathematically engineered, highly toxic, and completely fatal biological illusion. The human nervous system operates on a strict, finite, and highly uncompromising daily energy budget. Wasting this precious metabolic fuel on unoptimized, brute force labor actively destroys the exact biological hardware required to process complex variables. The critical window of opportunity to reverse this severe metabolic drain is shrinking rapidly today. Anyone who ignores the next few minutes of this clinical breakdown will accumulate a permanent biological debt, guaranteeing irreversible structural damage to the cerebral cortex. Elite cognitive function absolutely requires maximum biological leverage and absolute internal efficiency. The extreme modern drive to simply outwork the competition actively and aggressively destroys that vital neurobiological efficiency. Society blindly worships painful energy expenditure as the ultimate display of mental toughness and discipline. However, the human brain manages its metabolic resources with extreme precision, heavily penalizing any unnecessary friction. It mathematically requires a massive surplus of pristine energy to execute high-level abstract thought, repair damaged cellular tissue, and maintain endocrine stability. Severe, unoptimized daily labor violently disrupts this essential neurological energy supply. When the physical body is forced to execute brute force tasks without strategic leverage, it immediately begins hemorrhaging essential metabolic power. The biological tax is immediate, silent, and thoroughly devastating to human longevity. The hidden clinical reality is that extreme, uncalculated effort is not a sign of elite ambition. It is a severe biological failure to understand and utilize systemic leverage. Forcing extreme output through massive physiological friction destroys the baseline metabolic rate completely, ensuring rapid cellular aging and early onset neurodegeneration. How brute force labor starves the brain. True biological dominance is not measured by the total volume of effort exerted, but by the strict mathematical efficiency of cellular energy distribution. The human prefrontal cortex, the highly evolved command center responsible for logic, strategic planning, and impulse control, is the absolute most metabolically expensive organ within the entire human body. Demands massive, uninterrupted volumes of glucose and pristine adenosine triphosphate to function even at a baseline level. Operating in a chronic state of brute force physical or mental labor is a literal biological disaster for this highly delicate energy system. Human evolution never designed the fragile nervous system to waste finite energy on poorly optimized, high-friction tasks. When the human organism is pushed through relentless, uncalculated exertion, it rapidly burns through systemic glucose reserves at terrifying, fundamentally unsustainable speeds. The biological response to this severe systemic energy deficit is violently devastating to the higher cognitive centers. As the physical body demands more and more fuel to sustain the unoptimized labor, the autonomic nervous system is forced to make a brutal evolutionary calculation. It actively reroutes the rapidly depleting glucose supply away from the prefrontal cortex and forcefully redirects it toward the muscular system and the primitive limbic brain just to survive the physical exertion. The cerebral cortex is literally plunged into a state of severe biological starvation. The highly ambitious worker believes an unbreakable mindset is being forged through this agonizing effort. Biologically, the exact opposite is occurring. The higher executive functions are actively shutting down due to acute localized hypoglycemia. The individual physically loses the biological capacity to sustain deep, frictionless focus because the delicate neural networks are quite literally starved of oxygen and vital nutrients. Willpower cannot magically override millions of years of deeply ingrained evolutionary survival programming. Forcing the physical body to operate in this state of severe metabolic starvation destroys cognitive clarity completely, locking the individual in a state of permanent, suffocating brain fog. Biological cost of cognitive friction. Executing daily tasks without utilizing profound biological and environmental leverage generates massive amounts of internal cognitive friction. Cognitive friction occurs when the brain is forced to process inefficient, chaotic, and unorganized variables constantly without a streamlined system. Every single micro-decision, every unoptimized action, and every forced physical movement generates measurable heat and highly toxic metabolic waste deep within the neural pathways. The highly disciplined worker who refuses to use leverage forces the brain to grind its gears relentlessly, identical to an engine running at maximum capacity without vital lubrication. This constant, unmanaged internal friction actively degrades the myelin sheath, the crucial fatty insulation that wraps around healthy neural pathways and allows electrical signals to travel at optimal speeds. As the myelin is violently stripped away by the chronic stress of unoptimized labor, the electrical impulses within the brain begin to short-circuit and leak energy. Information processing slows down to an agonizing crawl. The central nervous system becomes highly inflamed, sluggish, and severely compromised. Basic daily tasks that should require minimal effort suddenly demand monumental, exhausting, and highly painful conscious energy just to initiate. The individual operates continuously through a thick wall of internal resistance, constantly dropping crucial variables and failing to process complex environmental data efficiently. The aesthetic of pushing through the pain perfectly hides an internal biological environment that is actively breaking down under the weight of its own unmanaged friction. The biological organism is not becoming stronger through this struggle. It is simply deteriorating at an accelerated rate. The ultimate price for utilizing brute force instead of highly refined biological leverage is the rapid, irreversible decay of the neural architecture. Exhaustion destroys the prefrontal cortex. Operating a human body in a permanent state of unoptimized exhaustion systematically destroys the delicate neurochemical balance required for elite executive function. The prefrontal cortex mathematically requires a massive surplus of metabolic energy to override primitive impulses and execute highly complex, long-term strategic variables. When the biological organism wastes its finite daily energy on brute force, high-friction labor, this required surplus completely evaporates. The brain detects the severe drop in available adenosine triphosphate and instantly initiates a strict energy conservation protocol. It intentionally and aggressively shuts down the prefrontal cortex to preserve whatever remaining fuel exists for the primitive survival mechanisms. The exhausted individual is forcefully downgraded from a highly evolved strategic thinker to a purely reactive, emotionally volatile animal. The highly reactive amygdala completely hijacks the cognitive operating system. The exhausted worker operates purely in a primitive fight-or-flight mode, completely controlled by fear, anxiety, and short-term survival instincts. They become biologically incapable of executing deep, frictionless abstract thought or recognizing high-level patterns in their environment. The natural capacity to calculate risk, recognize unique opportunities, and design efficient systems evaporates completely from the daily human experience. Every single decision made in this severe state of metabolic exhaustion is fundamentally flawed, driven by the desperate biological need for immediate relief rather than long-term optimization. The globally praised hustle mentality, when applied without leverage, is entirely a manifestation of a failing, heavily compromised biological machine. The exact biological machinery required to sustain elite performance and outmaneuver the competition is permanently disabled by the relentless pursuit of uncalculated effort. The hidden link between hard work and apoptosis. The most devastating biological consequence of extreme, unoptimized labor is the direct initiation of widespread cellular death within the human brain. Chronic exhaustion directly alters the fundamental survival behavior of the central nervous system, creating an environment of severe internal neurotoxicity. When delicate neurons in the cerebral cortex are consistently starved of glucose and forced to operate under massive cognitive friction, they sustain critical structural damage. To protect the surrounding neural network from the spread of toxic, damaged cellular material, the brain executes a violent, highly programmed biological protocol known as apoptosis. Apoptosis is the literal, mathematically precise process of cellular suicide. The starved, exhausted neurons actively trigger their own death sequence, breaking themselves down into fragments to be cleared away by the immune system. The individual blindly believes an unstoppable, highly efficient work ethic is being built through sheer force of will. In reality, the highly praised hard work is directly causing massive cellular death in the highest cognitive centers. The human being is physically losing brain mass with every passing month of chronic, unoptimized exhaustion. The microglia, which act as the essential immune cells of the brain, become hyperactive under this extreme stress, aggressively devouring the dying neurons and driving severe neuroinflammation deep into the surrounding tissue. The brain physically shrinks under the crushing, relentless pressure of constant, friction-heavy motion. The modern digital hustle routine intentionally engineers a weak, docile, easily distracted mind entirely incapable of complex logical reasoning. The ultimate biological cost of wasting finite metabolic energy on brute force labor is the complete structural and total fragmentation of human intelligence. How to engineer true biological leverage. Reclaiming absolute cognitive dominance requires completely and violently abandoning the highly toxic illusion that sheer effort equates to elite performance. The true global elite optimize their entire biological existence solely for maximum neural efficiency, absolutely refusing to waste finite metabolic energy on brute force friction. The human brain mathematically demands deep, unshakable physiological calm and massive energy surpluses to execute brilliant, flawless, high-level abstract thought. Returning to a natural, highly stable metabolic baseline is strictly mandatory immediately to halt the rapid, compounding cognitive decay. This targeted optimization protocol instantly stops the violent neural inflammation and forcefully halts the highly destructive process of cellular apoptosis. The individual must ruthlessly eliminate all unnecessary cognitive and physical friction from the daily routine to protect the vital glucose supply. The vagus nerve must be intentionally activated daily through profound, uncompromising stillness to rapidly recharge the mitochondrial power plants and restore pristine ATP production. This specific biological activation rapidly flushes toxic metabolic waste completely from the fragile neural pathways, restoring crystalline cognitive clarity and repairing the damaged myelin sheath. Elite executive function returns rapidly once the artificial exhaustion and chronic cellular starvation finally end. The prefrontal cortex physically expands back to its optimal, highly dominant biological size, reclaiming full control over the reactive amygdala and the entire nervous system. The highest global performers prioritize the intense protection of their metabolic energy infinitely above meaningless, unoptimized labor. True modern power is strictly biological, deeply optimized through leverage, and never relies on frantic, energy-draining motion. This clinical breakdown firmly sets the required theoretical foundation for elite metabolic recovery and biological leverage. However, theoretical knowledge without exact, aggressive tactical execution guarantees absolute, mathematically certain failure. The exact step-by-step clinical protocols required to biologically stop cellular apoptosis and rebuild the metabolic baseline exist right now. The mainstream productivity industry actively tries to suppress the specific recovery data entirely to maintain an exhausted, compliant demographic that relies purely on brute force. These essential clinical protocols are located directly in the description below this video right now. Go to the description immediately and access these elite optimization protocols today before the algorithm removes them. Applying these specific clinical resources guarantees the reclamation of lost cognitive dominance entirely and permanently. This eliminates metabolic starvation fundamentally and completely bypasses the exhausted, highly distracted global competition. Subscribe to this channel immediately to join the absolute minority operating at peak biological efficiency. Stop trading human cognitive longevity for a severe, unoptimized routine that actively destroys the cerebral cortex. The critical window of opportunity to reverse the specific neural damage is closing extremely fast. Reclaim the shattered metabolic baseline today before the biological damage becomes permanent and irreversible.